It's our pleasure now to be joined by Representative Dan Kirkbride, who served Converse and Platte County since 2013 on this Capital Outlook profile. Representative, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for coming out and spending some time with me.
We're in your beautiful home. We've got a beautiful view of this part of Wyoming. You've lived here a long time, a fourth-generation cattle rancher.
Yes, I've been here 36 years, and my family came in the 19th century to Wyoming from England. So.
And were they sheep ranchers to start? Is that...
You know, actually, they came and got jobs with some of their neighbors from England who had come to this country a few years before. And so then they got homesteads and started in, and probably started out with sheep as much as anything, yes. And
now you run cattle?
All cattle, yes.
And it's still a family operation?
Still a family operation. There's 10 of us involved, and I'm kind of the satellite ranch. The other guys are down in northern Laramie County, would be the main operation.
Representative, you were, prior to serving in the legislature, you were a county commissioner.
Yes.
Why did you start public service? What motivated you to serve?
You know, it was something I always thought I would do. Even as a young man, I just thought someday I'll run for something. I probably thought school board would be one of the things I'd done, which I haven't done. When my kids were that age, I was too busy to be on school board, following the kids. Mm-hmm. And then as I got older and nearer where I might launch into something like that, you know, I'd see people making decisions and I'd think, well, I could make those decisions. So finally at about age 50, I ran for commissioner.
You enjoy that time?
8-year stint there. Yeah, I really did enjoy it. That's important work, and it kind of dovetailed nicely with the ranching, you know, where you'd have 2 meetings a month and you could sort of plan for them, and not the one big block of time like you have at the legislature.
It's year-round. I mean, you've been chairman of an important committee that mm-hmm. Has done a lot of heavy lifting in the interim and will likely continue to do more. Is that problematic for what you want to do here with the ranch, or is it been able to work well for you?
No, actually, my son has come back here in the last year to sort of phase in while I phase out a little on the ranch. So I probably have more time than I've ever had, which will be nice.
But what made you run for the legislature?
You know, I had good experience as a commissioner, and then actually lost my election in 10 and sat out a couple of years, and then there was an opening. Representative Peasley from Douglas decided not to run, so this seat was open, and you know how that always gets people's interest. And so I decided, well, here's a chance to get my oar in the water on something like that. So
this is a big district. I mean, we're near Chugwater, where you live. It goes clear up to Douglas.
About 85 miles from north to south. Yes.
Areas in between. Is it hard for you to stay in touch with all your constituents then?
Well, I'm not just at everything. It would probably be helpful if I lived in one of the population centers, you know, Wheatland or Douglas. I could be a little more visible, but there's an awful lot of stuff done with email and phone calls.
And you maintain a social media presence. You work hard to keep your constituents up to date. That way, it appears to me.
Got a Facebook page, yes. My wife coaches me on that.
Is that odd for you to be in that game?
A little bit.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You were a journalism major.
Yes.
In school, you would think it'd be easy, right? Just pop off those posts and be done. And
you know, I think there's something about, I see the guys at the legislature who are maybe 40 and younger, they just think in those terms more than I do. So I don't get as much good out of it probably as some of the younger guys do, but it's a good tool.
You've been a writer in the past also.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, president of Wyoming Writers, Inc. at one time.
Right.
Is that a hobby of yours, would you say?
Yes. I never worked a lot professionally as a journalist after I got out of college, but I always had a lot of fun writing. In particular, in the late 80s and early 90s, I wrote a monthly human interest column in Farm and Ranch newspapers that I just really enjoyed doing it, probably. I enjoyed more than the readers, but that might get back to that again someday.
We're in your beautiful home. We are near Chugwater, so got to ask the question. You ever entered the Chugwater chili cook-off?
No. My main input to the cook-off has been as a judge.
Yeah.
I get to be a judge every now and then. That's fun.
One of the things that you've talked about on your social media page and as you've been campaigning through the years is you view yourself as a moderate conservative. And to some folks, those words may not go together. Where does that fit in your philosophy?
It's just how I'm wired, Craig. I just look at both sides of an issue. Sometimes I'm probably not just sometimes, a lot of times I'm for the underdog. And I just, I've always had the approach that you try to come up with a fair solution to a problem and not oppress the loser in the process, and maybe come up with something that they live with and get people to work together. And that's been my approach to life and politics, really.
You've been in a legislature that maybe in the House, up until this point, has become a little more conservative. Has that been problematic in trying to negotiate and work your way through tough issues that kind of are heavy to lift?
It's an interesting flavor that being county commissioner didn't have. County commissioner was much more of a nonpartisan effort. And then I got in the legislature and suddenly it's more partisan. And before you run, you know, you fill out all the questionnaires all summer long. Different groups want to know where you stand on things. More partisan. There's just been a conservative bloc in the House the 6 years I've been there of 15 to 20 voters that kind of held together in a tight position. And a lot of times I vote with them, but not always. And then, of course, about 8 to 10 Democrats at the other end of the spectrum. So
you've mentioned before there's almost 3 groups.
There's almost 3 groups. I would agree with that.
And so you use also a football field as a metaphor for where you stand.
Yes, I've always said that I see the philosophical treasure houses in the end zone, and I live at about the 25-yard line.
So not at the 50.
Not at the 50, but somewhere out there in the 25 to 30 of Republican thinking, yes.
You've taken on the chairmanship of the Judicial Committee. Mm-hmm. You enjoyed that?
I really have enjoyed it. I've learned a lot of just about the whole field of the judiciary and criminal justice and correction system, family law. So tremendous education at my stage of life to learn a lot about something new. And then I've enjoyed the process. We work with important bills. We've had a good committee, both the House and Senate members, and got some really good things done, particularly in this last session of the legislature in early 18.
You've worried this interim on the long-term fiscal health of the correction system. And I guess the question is the way we do things in Wyoming relative to corrections sustainable with our economy as it is?
I think some changes would be very healthy for us, but in order to make them, we need to spend some money up front. That seems to be a bit of a barrier, but in a nutshell, we've looked at some criminal justice reform measures where you spend your money on treatment for people rather than on incarceration for people.
And I know that you've talked about that in this interim a lot. Can Wyoming do that successfully given the state's somewhat large and massive geography where services, mental health services in particular, aren't equally available all across the state?
That's one of the drawbacks to it, that a prisoner coming out of the system goes back to his little hometown and there isn't the access to mental health that unless he happens to live in Cheyenne or Casper or Sheridan or somewhere. So that's one of the things we try to, we're working on, we're overcoming. We've got the Department of Family Services people in the Labor and Health Committee are collaborating on some solutions to that. But yeah, that's part of the equation.
We're visiting before the session has started, airing this during the session, of course, but the state has seen some somewhat more positive revenue projections. You have said maybe that will then allow this legislature and maybe a couple that will follow to kick the can down the road a little bit farther relative to a serious look at Wyoming's future relative to its revenues. Does that concern you?
It does concern me because I think one of the things you're elected to have is some vision about what's coming. And we can probably get through 5 years in pretty good shape almost no matter what happens. What about 10 years from now? Where will we be? And the industry people themselves say that the coal and the natural gas industries it's a new normal for them. So we're right now pinning a lot of our hopes on oil and a strong stock market, but I don't know if that's enough to take us into the future and provide the services that we need in the state that people want, and take good care of our responsibilities.
I've read that you've used the metaphor of a tree project to describe what it is that you do. That you say that it nicely parallels your legislative involvement. You and your wife will not see the trees grow to their true fruition, but you plant them so that they'll be strong and tall in places for decades to come. Do you think that we're visionary enough to really look at things long-term, or are there short-term barriers that really prevent us from doing what you just talked about?
You know, I hope we can at least begin to have more of those discussions, particularly regarding the financial picture of the state and revenue. We just, the old way that worked so well for us for, 5 or 6 decades is just not what it was. It's a new deal. What the statistics were that in 2006, minerals were supplying 67% of the state's revenue. In 2017, they were supplying 52%. So I think we need to just have that discussion about what this is going to be like in the future. And we've done a lot of cutting, and cutting's good, and we've tried to find efficiencies. We're still working on that. But I don't know that that's the whole answer to the problem.
You sponsored a year ago House Bill 176, Tax Reform 2020 Committee is what the bill was titled, along those same lines, yet it never saw the light of day. Why is it such a hard and difficult discussion?
I think people get nervous when you even bring that subject up, that it's somehow code words for a state income tax. And that makes them nervous, and it makes all the legislators nervous that if they somehow come across as a proponent of that they're going to have a difficult opponent at the next election. But I think you can have the discussion. When they had the discussion in 2000, and they had one of the most fine conservative statesmen the state's probably ever had in Senator Hines from Campbell County, was the chairman. I've got a list somewhere in my office of like a dozen different concepts that later worked their way into the system, and I think there's probably some fruit like that to be had where we'd have that discussion again. We would involve some people beyond the legislature on a task force like that would have some good input. I think it's a valuable thing. I'll bring the bill and see what they do with it, and if it doesn't fly, maybe bring it again and call it Revenue Reform 2022. You know,
it'll step through. So the question becomes, can Wyoming ever get away from boom and bust?
I think we can do better. I don't know if we can get away from it. We're a natural resource state. We're pretty comfortable with that for the most part.
One of the gubernatorial candidates said that that's what we are. That's a hand we've been dealt. Let's deal with it. Is that a good attitude? Is that the right attitude?
I'd like to try working on that first and having that discussion about what that would look like, were we to try to redistribute, I guess is probably the word, of how we fund the state.
Representative Kirkbride, we are very thankful that you've graciously allowed us to come into your home today, and we really appreciate this time that you spent with us on this Capital Outlook profile.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. I enjoyed the visit.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.